I've never actually been what you would call a spontaneous person. Free spirits, not the way I fly. I'm mostly United. And even in college, I went to New York University when everyone was experimenting. It just wasn't for me. And if you don't know, NYU is in the Village, and so there was a lot of experimenting going on. But I kept my eye on the prize. I was trying to get good grades and get a job when I graduated. But eventually, the whole being young and being around other young people it kind of wore me down. And well, this one time in my sophomore year, I did it. I experimented. I here's the thing. I've never told anyone about this. It's kind of embarrassing. It's well, those of us who are very straight edge, when we bend, we just, go far out there, man. So I didn't just experiment a little bit. Like I experimented a lot. Like I went deep, for a long time too. It was out of this world. I don't know how else to say this. I experimented with listening to jazz. Yeah. It was just this thing, it just took a hold of me. I couldn't help it. My best friend at the time, Duho, he was taking this jazz appreciation class, and he had to go and listen to jazz at these clubs in the West Village, and amazingly enough, they weren't very popular places in New York. So they didn't charge a cover charge or a drink minimum, so I could go for free, and so I did. I went with Duho. He invited me, and when I walked in, it was like, we sat down and we started to listen, and I really got into it. I started to feel the music and feel the jazz, like what was happening on stage. It was so free spirited. If you don't know, jazz is all about improvisation. The musicians and their finger work. They're doing their set, and then they just sort of stop and be like, take it away, and then the trombonist would like do stuff that he was just feeling. And I fell in love with that. I fell in love with the whole idea of just feeling it. And even when Duho's class was over, even when the semester ended and the summer came around, I kept going. I kept going to that jazz club and listening to that music and just being there, just being in the moment. It felt freeing. And then this one night towards the end of summer, uh, this this woman stepped up on stage. She took the microphone. She just started singing. I'd never seen her before, but that's the kind of crazy stuff that happens at jazz clubs. And she was beautiful. I mean, she was short. She was shorter than me, and she was what my dad would have called Zoptic, very curvy, and she had this voice, this otherworldly voice, and she seemed to be like lit from within with this sort of otherworldly glow, kind of like it reminded me of like something David Lynch would have lit for like a Twin Peaks scene. But I was just transfixed, I was transported by her singing and by just everything about her, and I couldn't take my eyes off of her. And as the end of her set came, as her song came to a close, she seemed to be locking eyes with me, and I couldn't believe it, because I mean there was like 4 5 other people in the room. I mean, she could have had her pick of any of them, but when her song ended, she walked up to me, and I stood up, and she leaned in and kissed me, and it was a good kiss. And I had never done that. I'd never kissed a woman before, but it was, yeah, I liked it. And then when our kiss broke off, without saying anything else, she just said, "Do you want to come with me?" And yeah, I did. I went with it. I felt the moment, and I went with it. And I followed her out of there, and she led me just a few blocks away to an apartment building in the West Village. And apartment buildings in the West Village, they all kind of look like brownstones on the outside, and then when you walk into them, they're just maybe 2 apartments on each floor. And she led me up one and then another and then another. And when we finally stepped through the door, we were on the roof. And it was clear she had spent time there because she had a sort of nest set up on the roof, blankets and cushions and what have you. And she settled herself in the middle of the nest and gestured me over. And I went and I sat down next to her and we started kissing some more. And it was still really good. And then after a couple minutes, she pushed me away a little, she broke off the kiss and she said, I have to tell you something. And that's when that brain of mine, that planner brain of mine, that logical brain of mine kicked in and went, oh, what am I doing? Of course, I've never done this before. I never went home with a stranger because, if it's a guy, it could be dangerous. And I'd never gone home with a woman before. I've never been with a woman, but like, maybe it's not dangerous, but she could have like an STD. Like, what is she going to tell me? I just started thinking about all of the terrible things that were about to happen. And then she said, I'm an alien and I'm leaving town tomorrow and I have to be upfront about it. I don't want a long distance, long-term relationship. So I just want to make sure that, you're okay with this just being tonight, just about us having fun together. And I don't know. I mean, I'd never had just a one night stand before and I wasn't sure if I was okay with it, but I did know that I wanted to see where this went and I was having a good time. And so I said, yeah, I'm okay with it. And we went back to kissing and it went back to being amazing. And then as we're making out some more, I started remembering what she had said. And I, I remembered how she had said the alien thing. And then I kind of pushed her away and I said, well, I'm just curious, like where you're from. Cause in the city, we get all types here. Like, are you from like Mexico or Canada? And she said, well, I don't know where either of those places are. No, my planet is way far away. It hasn't really been charted by your planet yet. So I couldn't really give you directions. So, and that's when my brain was like, God damn. Of course, she's you do something crazy, you go home with a stranger and you end up on a roof with a crazy person who thinks she's an alien. So I started looking for an exit. I knew where the exit was, but I started looking for a way to like get out of this situation when she put her hand on my shoulder. And it was a hot summer night and yet her hand was very cool on my shoulder. And she said, I can prove it if you promise not to scream. And before I could make that promise, well, have you ever seen Mission Impossible? She just kind of, took her whole head off. And yeah, so here's a fun fact about New York City. In New York City, no one can hear you scream. So, I screamed for a while. And when I finally stopped, I calmed down a little bit and I took a few deep breaths and I looked at her, at her as she really was. And, she was really still quite beautiful, alien for sure, but humanoid, smaller nose, sort of non-existent really. And then the longer lips and mouth and just huge eyes. And then her skin, it was like greenish hue and it seemed to be lit up with a sort of bioluminescence. I don't know if you can call it that when it's not a human. I don't know what the right term is, but she glowed. Okay. And it was beautiful. She was beautiful. And she said, do you want to do this? Do you want to spend a night of pleasure together? And I mean, I was young. This was my free spirit moment. So I went with it. And I took off my clothes and she took off her skin and under all of those curves, she had some extra limbs. And they were agile, tactile, strong. She knew how to use them well. And I mean, it was great. I mean, the first 5 or 6 times were out of this world fantastic. And then I got kind of tired, and she was a little disappointed, but at some point I was like, I'm gonna pass out. I need to go to sleep. So I laid down, and she kind of settled all of her limbs around me, and I fell asleep in her arms and limbs. And I woke up in the morning. The sun was up, the cabs were cooing, and she was gone. No trace of her left. And I realized I wasn't okay with it. I didn't want her to be gone. I wanted more of what I had had. And so I went back to that jazz club that night, and the next night, and the next night, and until the summer was over. But she was never there. I never saw her again. And when the semester started, I hung it up. I hung it up. I hung up that spontaneity, you know. And I never did again have alien sex or go to jazz clubs. But sometimes on a hot summer night, I like to climb out on my roof, my cell phone, look up at the stars, and play some smooth jazz and just remember.